Thanks for joining us today, everybody. We're going to have our webinar covering rising insurance premiums and ways to help afford them. Presenting today, we have CEO of McCool Risk Solutions, Ed McCool, and McCool Insurance Consultant, Eric Eggert. One attendee today will be selected to win a $50 Amazon gift card. We will reach out to you later today via email. And the webinar is being recorded. We will send out a copy to every registrant later today or tomorrow. And then lastly, the Q&A is open. We will answer the questions either as we come in, if we can grab them, otherwise at the end of the presentation. And that's going to do it for me. Ed, take it away.
All right. Thank you, Kira. Welcome, everyone. Another premium increase. We can't afford it is the name of this webinar. This came about as I was sitting and explaining to a board that one of their policies was going to go up, and there was an astronomical basis, and we'll go into it a little bit, but that's kind of what one of the board members yelled at me. And when I say yelled, I'm saying yelled. So that became the title of this. So what we're going to do is we're going to explain premium increases, where they come, and what you can do to offset some of them. Because at this point, I'm sure we are all tired of the hard market. Every single association has seen an increase each of the past, I'm going to say 4 years. The question is how much of an increase? And just a little, and Eric's going to go into the hard market in a little while, but I've been doing this 29 years, and this is by far the worst hard and the longest hard market that at least I've experienced. And I've lived through 9/11 and Sandy and others. So this kind of one is a difficult one that does not seem to want to go away. Associations with insurance companies that specialize in co-op and condominium insurance may have only, and I'll kind of highlight only, had increases of 15 to 20% each of the past few years. Well, that's a lot. And you keep multiplying that over several different years, they're paying hefty premiums. But they are the lucky ones. So most associations have enough funds in their reserve to cover these kind of increases. But there are plenty of associations out there who have been canceled or for different reasons, some of it being unfavorable loss history, or they may have what is known as defective electric, which are federal specific stab lock circuit breakers, which are frowned upon in the industry. What about those associations? We have seen several, some that we insure and some that have approached us to insure them, where their insurance premiums have absolutely skyrocketed. I mean, I know of one property that had an increase from 200,000 to almost 900,000 because they have unfavorable loss history. To make matters worse, they have work going on. So what happens is in those instances, well, they had some issues with trip and falls and slip and falls, and so liability carriers didn't want to provide quotes, and they had ongoing roof work, and so property carriers also didn't want to insure them. So they went up $700,000. And so we've seen other associations who have seen some of the same instances, 100%, 200%, or even more. In those instances, these increases could last for several years. So, for example, with loss history, the insurance company looks back several years, and if it's still on there, which it will be for a good 5 years, or if these claims are open, they're going to continue to factor that into whether they want to provide a quote. So these associations that are seeing these large increases, it's not a 1 year thing. It may be several years before they can return to quote unquote normal insurance premiums. Eric, you want to give us a little background on why these premiums, the hard market, and why they're increasing the past few years?
Yep. So insurance markets are very cyclical. Sometimes we're in a soft market, sometimes we're in a normal market. As Ed mentioned, we're in a hard market, and not just any hard market, probably the hardest market the insurance industry has ever seen. So there's a few different things that go into what makes a hard market, and it affects each policy somewhat differently. So for your property policies, that's your building coverage. You know, if there's a fire to the building, things like that. Inflation. We love hearing that word right now. Everything's inflated. But inflation is a huge driving factor behind premium increases. The increased cost of construction materials. So with the rising cost of construction materials, the insurance carriers have to increase your building limit because now it costs more money to repair your building or replace your building if there were a total loss. So once they increase that amount of coverage within your policy, they have to charge more money to insure you for that. There's also been a huge increase in catastrophic storms in both size and frequency. And these storms are happening all over the country. You know, we all saw what happened to Hawaii earlier this year. California had their first hurricane in 30-something years. I mean, just a few weeks ago, the rain that was coming down in Brooklyn flooded the streets. So, I mean, I'm mentioning a lot of stuff on the West Coast, but there hasn't been that much happening on the East Coast lately, fortunately. And along with that, the insurance carriers will take into consideration the residential industry as a whole. So just because it's happening over there, it still impacts us because we're in that residential industry. They look at that as an entire package there. On the
Well,
general
stop
liability,
there for a second, Eric, but you may have carriers who are writing both here and on the West Coast. And so if there's things happening on the West Coast, it's going to affect us whether it happened here or not. I mean, it's kind of, they look at everything all in one basket and say, well, if we're unprofitable, we got to raise the rates everywhere.
exactly. And then on the general liability side of the policy, that's your trip and falls, your slip and falls. Those are the most common claims we see there. You have social inflation. That's where jurors are awarding claimants with higher payouts than they've ever awarded before. A few years ago, $1 million was a ton of money, and everybody would sue for $1 million. Now people are starting at 5 million and 10 million and sort of working their way down from there. So these claims are being paid out higher. Also in New York, we have to deal with New York labor laws. New Jersey folks, we're lucky you don't have to deal with that, but anyone from New York knows just how big and how severe those claims can be. On the umbrella side of things, there was a carrier a couple years ago that could offer $100 million limits for very low premiums. I'm talking $1,200, $1,500 for $100 million limits. That carrier got beat up pretty bad. They were just paying out so many claims that because any claim that they have to pay out is already over $1 million that exceeded in the general liability policy. So for them to pay out, it's already a huge claim. And they realized pretty quickly that their premiums were not priced appropriately. So they actually pulled out of the market altogether. Other carriers saw that and took notice and had increased their premiums. They became much more selective. In New York City, in the 5 boroughs, they're very concerned about your building violations, the DOB violations, HPD violations. If you have those, umbrella carriers have become much more selective on whether or not they'll even offer you a quote. And then building updates. This affects us in New York and in New Jersey, where they want to see that the roof has been updated. They want to see the electricals updated and plumbing is being updated. Now, obviously, a lot of these pipes are old. The electrical systems can be old, but they want to see that it's being maintained, upgraded, in proper working order. And those are things they're looking for. And if it's not, they're not going to offer us a quote. So, I mean, that kind of leaves us with limited choices where that $100 million limit's out the window at this point. I mean, you're lucky to get a $5 million limit for $10,000. I mean, it's that bad where it's changed so drastically over the past couple of years. And the last thing that's really kind of driving these premium increases is
I was going to say is 5 years ago, we insure probably 1,600 or so community associations. 5 years ago, most of them had between 50 million and 100 million in coverage. Now, I would say majority of those 1,600 or more probably have 5 million with a maximum of 25 million. The ones that have 100 million now are the exceptions, not the rule. I've seen more $5 million umbrellas in the last couple of years than I've seen in my entire career. So you're right about that.
Yeah. And the change there is excess liability versus umbrella policies. There's some carriers and brokers will kind of say that it's an umbrella policy when it's an excess. You just really want to check and make sure that there is a little bit of a difference there, as the umbrella tends to be more comprehensive. So keep an eye out for that. And the last thing kind of driving premium increases has been reinsurance. That's the best way to describe that is it's basically insurance for insurance carriers. They have to go to reinsurance carriers to get their rates. When the reinsurance carriers are raising the rates for the insurance carriers, they have to pass that down to us as consumers. So these things are all kind of the reason behind premium increases over the past few years.
Last one, Eric, is the reason why everyone here should budget in 2024, continue to budget an increase, because although we may have the liability and umbrella may have leveled off, as Eric is talking about, reinsurance has been raising their rates and it flows down. And I believe from everything we're hearing and seeing, we're going to see more of that in 2024.
So the question is, where does the money come from to pay for the increases in premiums or the unbudgeted increase in premiums? And essentially, as we all know, premiums are a common expense that are generally included within the maintenance fees. And assuming there's enough money in the reserve account, the expense for the insurance usually comes from there. But if the association doesn't have enough money in the reserve account or doesn't want to use up the remaining balance, what are their options? So here's the options we have outlined. They could finance their insurance and premiums. For a co-op, they could refinance their mortgage, or for a condominium, they can take out a loan. You can raise maintenance fees, or you can assess the owners. with financing the insurance policies, typically what you'll do is this is when you can't afford to pay it in full. And with premiums going up so drastically, a lot of associations aren't able to pay them in full. So in those instances, they can either pay up in installments if the carrier offers that, but a lot of carriers aren't offering installments, so they do have no choice left but to finance. And the carriers that do offer installments will still charge a fee. It's typically a lot less than an installment charge. Installment charges we're seeing right now are on average around 12%. So I mean, just like everything else, those are up too. But it is a good option. And basically, to get started with the finance agreement, you just have to pay a down payment, the deposit. Typically, it's around a minimum of 25%. And then you set it up for a number of different installments, whatever you're comfortable with, whatever you can afford. And usually your broker is able to get you some options, the smallest being around 3 installments, and the highest is usually around 10 installments. And they can usually give you, like I said, options so you can kind of see what you can afford, what makes sense. And it's nice to have this because in between when these installments are due for the finance agreement, you can continue to collect maintenance fees. Okay, we can't afford this in full, but over the course of the year, as we collect each month, we'll be able to pay our installment fee that is owed. And the nice thing about this is all of a sudden, if you do become fortunate enough to have some extra cash lying around in that reserve account, you could pay these off early. So, I mean, that it's not just because you enter the finance agreement doesn't mean you're stuck in it for the entire year. You can pay them off early, but if you're not able to do that, you are stuck in it for the entire year. Some policies can actually not be financed, though, like flood policies, for example. Those are 100% fully earned. Those are something that can't be financed because the insurance carriers expect to get that money up front. And if that were to get canceled, they would not reimburse the finance company. So the finance companies do not allow those to be financed.
So financing works, I'm going to jump here again, Eric. Financing works when you're able to finance it. One, the policy allows you to do so. I mean, if it has a high minimum earned premium or it's 100% minimum earned like flood, can't do it. And we're going to go into some other options of what they can do to fund it at that point. But if you can finance it, that's a great option. We're going to get into some options here where people are a little bit more trouble and financing isn't going to work for them. Get it.
The next option here is to take out a loan, and why don't you take that one away?
Problem with taking a loan is not something you do overnight. It's not like you approach a loan shark on the street and he hands you the money and you got a week to pay it back. If you're refinancing a mortgage or taking a loan, they're not quick and easy options. So this is something that, hey, this is great. We know something is coming. You have to replace the roof. So when it comes to the insurance premiums, taking a loan is probably not going to be an option, especially with the fact is, again, if you have an association who is kind of in trouble because their insurance premiums have skyrocketed for 1 year, a lot of times, as I mentioned before, that lasts a couple of years. So taking a loan, probably not the best option. Then you got raising maintenance fees. It's kind of the same thing there. Yes, raising maintenance fees works, but raising maintenance fees is, okay, well, that's over the course of the next 12 months. You've raised it and accumulate that money. So it's really more of a budget thing, but that'll work if the association has enough funds to either pay the insurance premiums, and now they want to recoup it by making sure that they increase the maintenance. That may work if they have enough money to pay the down payment down on a finance agreement. But sometimes the increase is so drastic that the association doesn't even have enough money to pay the deposit. I've seen situations in that case, like the one I mentioned before, which went up almost 500%. They didn't even have enough money to pay the down payment on the finance agreement. So we're going to get into some scenarios of what they can do at that point. But realistically, in this day and age, I do think that the board should be considering raising the maintenance on an annual basis. And there's probably a lot of people who want to shoot me for saying that. But I understand I own a condo unit in Florida, and we've seen maintenance increases the past 3 years, and a lot of the owners don't understand why, and it needs to be explained. Expenses have gone up, whether it's insurance or taxes or anything else, everything has gone up. And so that's a good way to make sure that there's money in reserves to pay for a rainy day like this. But a lot of the boards, figure, and they're right, once they raise maintenance, the figure rarely goes back down. Another option is to assess the owners. And this is the one that, again, I have this unit in Florida, and we've been assessed several times over the last couple of years. And I have a friend who, kind of screams, "Oh, the board doesn't know what they're doing." And I explained to them, the money has to come from someplace, and it's either increasing maintenance basically or assessments. And so an assessment really, when it comes to the insurance premiums, it's much more palatable to digest when you divide it by the number of units and you think of it that way. So the association I was talking about earlier, well, they had $130,000 increase, which was strictly their umbrella basically. And their initial response was, "No, we can't afford it." Okay, well, when I really kind of divided that by the number of units they had over 670, it worked out to $190 per unit, $193 per unit. It was much easier for them to digest at that point. Now, nobody wants to pay an assessment, but when you look at it at $193 a person versus $130,000, it's much easier. And we're starting to see and recommend, at least I know that the attorneys are recommending, you need to assess at this point if need be, because you need insurance. And the answer isn't to get rid of insurance or lower your insurance. The answer is you still need insurance. And so this may be the best possible way to do it. As with raising maintenance, I know a lot of boards don't like to assess the owner, but the truth is one or both are a necessity. Over the course of time, and we see it, expenses are going to increase. It's simply part of life. If the amount of money the association is taking in doesn't increase, how is it going to offset the expenses that are increasing? So it needs to be prepared here. And one insurance company executive I was talking to the other day basically said, "I wonder if the hard market is going to be the new norm." So I don't necessarily feel it will be, but I do think that boards need to be prepared, whether that's raising the maintenance to have a nice reserve fund there, or assessing every so often. That needs to be done.
Another thing that can be done is you can increase your property deductible. Now, this is not as lucrative as it once was. A few years, we keep talking about the past, looking back to it, it seems so nice now. But, a few years ago, you could increase your deductible and there would be huge premium relief there. Now it's not quite as much of premium relief as it was, but the nice part is there is indirect savings associated with increasing your property deductible, because you're not going to have a lot of those smaller claims in. By not having these small claims that really add up, if you were to increase your deductible to 5,000 or 10,000, then anything below that 5,000 isn't going to go in there, isn't going to be used against you on your loss runs. Your loss runs is a history of your claims over the past 5 years. So, and that's what carriers kind of look at when rating your building is, how are the losses? Is there a pattern developing? By getting rid of some of those, that's going to help keep your premiums down. A higher deductible also allows time for the board to assess the owners each time there is a claim. In New Jersey,
that sounds bad, but we're going to get into why that's not a bad thing in a second.
Yes, definitely. And in New Jersey, condo owners, if their unit is what is affected, then typically they're responsible for the deductible. And I'm going to go into that in a little bit more in a few minutes as well.
Right. And I just want to highlight something here for everyone. When you have a low deductible, as Eric had said, let's say 5,000, I can't tell you how many times, Eric, that I take a look at someone's loss runs and I'll see burst pipes on there with a payout of $568. As Eric had mentioned, it's the frequency they see there. And so maybe they're only paying out $500 or $1,000 here. But what they're saying is, okay, well, why do we keep seeing pipe bursts or toilet backups or even slip and falls outside? And it triggers kind of a reaction there. So you may be getting a $500 or $1,000 you're recouping, but trust me, the insurance companies will make their money back at the end of the day. So as Eric had said, you want to raise your deductible, even if it is possible that it is not cost effective from a premium standpoint. You may not be getting as much bang for your buck, but you got to think it keeps you and restricts you from putting in these small claims, and that's what gets everyone in trouble. Loss history is the single biggest reason why your premiums will increase.
Yeah, I mean, you see that pattern forming of the $500 claim, the $1,000 payout, and the insurance carriers look at it and they say the big one's coming. So, and they rate for that.
That is right. All right, so let's talk about, Eric, you had mentioned, and people probably started to sweat when you said, well, you can assess all the owners for the deductible. Well, homeowners policies for a condo owner or a co-op owner, they're called HO6 policies. They're known as unit owners insurance policies, and they apply either to a co-op or a condo. But they have a coverage that's generally built in, and it's $1,000 in coverage, but it's like $4 to increase it to $10,000, then they can increase it more. It's a coverage called loss assessment. And so what that is as long as it is a covered peril under the homeowner's policy, they will cover an assessment that is lodged by the board to the owners. So let's give an example: fire or a burst pipe, hurricane. Those are all standard perils that are going to be covered under every homeowner's policy. Now, if we said earthquake, that's probably a different story, because unless you had an earthquake under your homeowner's policy, it doesn't make a difference if the condo's policy has it. But the fires, the water damages like that, the same perils are covered under the homeowner's policy. Now, these policies for the homeowners, they cap how much they'll pay towards an assessment that is deductible related, but they will pay for an assessment that is deductible related. So let's give an example. We have a $25,000 deductible. There's a fire. The board turns around and assesses all 25 unit owners $1,000 each. Those unit owners can take and submit it to their insurance company. Their insurance company is going to pay it. Okay. And so that's where we're starting to recommend to our associations, you need to think about increasing your deductible for 3 reasons now. Well, I mean, 1, you may get some premium savings. 2, it's keeping you from putting in the smaller claims, which are deadly over the course of time. And 3, well, now what you can do is you can recoup that, and it really isn't held against the owner. So an assessment that they submit on the loss assessment really isn't held against them, but consider the claim. It's not pulled up on reports that the carriers run, basically. So it's an easy way for kind of a win-win situation.
So who's responsible for the deductible when push comes to shove? In a co-op or condo building, it's usually always going to be the association's responsibility if a deductible or if a claim has been reported against the association's policy. Now, there are some exceptions to that, but it doesn't really matter if it happens in a common hallway or in the lobby or an individual unit. If the governing documents state that something is the association's responsibility to insure, then the association's deductible is going to be the association's responsibility. And most governing documents are written to cover original specifications, not all, but most. And original specifications basically means that they'll rebuild, obviously, the shell of the building, the outside, the common areas, the lobbies, and the units back to how they were first built. So that's the original bathroom, the original kitchen, things like that. So you really want to check your governing documents to see how things are supposed to be insured and make sure that you're covering that properly, both as an association and your individual unit owners. In New Jersey, things are a little different, though, because of the New Jersey Condominium Act. This basically puts the responsibility of the deductible back onto the unit owners that are affected. For example, if a fire damaged 4 units and the association had a deductible of $10,000, those 4 unit owners would divide that up and each be responsible for $2,500 of that deductible. And oftentimes, if you do have the correct homeowner's insurance policy for your unit, there's going to be coverage in there to actually pay for that portion of the deductible. And a lot of these associations in New Jersey are implementing something called deductible resolutions to their governing documents to help clarify this and clarify the responsibility of the deductible. And in some instances, they're even amending it further than that. Now, if you don't already have that in your governing documents, it is very difficult to get anything added into your governing documents, as you all know, but it is not impossible. So certainly talk to your property managers and the attorneys that you have for your association on having that added to your governing documents, because that's a great thing to help protect you and help keep costs down.
Very good. Eric, I'm glad you mentioned it, but just to reiterate it, homeowner's policy. So if the owner is responsible for a deductible or something else per the governing documents, the homeowner's coverage will pick that up. And so we're going to talk about homeowners insurance now, because it's a topic that is coming up more and more lately. And we have always preached, we've always preached that everyone in the building should have insurance. The problem is twofold. In a condo, if they're not taking a mortgage, they're not typically required to maintain insurance. So they don't in some cases. And in a co-op, the shareholder, when they show up to the closing, they don't have to show proof that they have insurance coverage. They have to show proof that the co-op has insurance coverage. And I tell the story all the time. My father, who was the original owner of the agency, had bought a co-op back in the 90s, and he forgot to purchase insurance. So this is a guy who teaches classes on the necessity of it, has spent his life insuring them, and he forgot to get insurance. So you can see where people would forget that they may need it. Or I hear all the time, well, I don't have to, we pay for insurance, it's a line item and on maintenance. That doesn't mean you don't need insurance. So we've been preaching for years that people need to have insurance throughout the building. And what happens is, if we see more and more associations who are starting to either change the governing documents, or as they're being filed with the Attorney General, they're including requirements for owners to maintain insurance. So what happens is, knowing all the owners have insurance provides the board not only with options in terms of assessing the owners, which we talked about, but it also keeps peace of mind when there is a claim. I mean, I can't tell you how many instances where someone is annoyed because someone else's pipe or something overflows and causes damage to them. Well, that inevitably leads to a lawsuit, whether they're suing each other, they're suing the board, they're suing the property manager. They're still not going to be happy if they have insurance, but at least they know where they're recouping some of the funds from. There are other instances when an owner experiences damage to their contents and they have no insurance. What are they going to do? They're going to sue. I mean, that's their recourse. It's the same thing if their unit becomes uninhabitable due to a covered cause of loss, like a fire. They can't sleep there. They can't eat there. So what do they got to do? They got to go to a hotel. A couple $100s a night now. Well, how do they eat? Well, they got to go out to eat. So all of a sudden, you're looking at something where you're ringing up $500 a night for food and lodging. Where's that money going to come from? If they don't have insurance, they're going to sue somebody. So overall, each owner having insurance can keep the association's loss ratio down in some instances, and a lower loss ratio equals lower insurance premiums. Now, if homeowners insurance is required by the governing document, it's got to be monitored to ensure compliance. Why? Well, I mean, let's think about it. And I'm skipping to number 3 here, but if you have 100 units in the building, there's 100 different expiration dates. So it's not like, hey, everybody has the same insurance policy, expires on January 1st. That would be easy if it was like that. So first off, what's the best way to do this? Hopefully the insurance requirements include what coverages are required to be maintained at minimum limits. I mean, I've seen instances where the governing documents say, okay, well, owner needs to maintain insurance. But what kind of insurance? It doesn't say what kind of limits. It doesn't say what kind of coverages. How do you know if they're complying or not? I've seen instances where owners may have insurance coverage, but it's not the coverages the board would want. It may not be the limits. I've seen homeowners associations where the owners are responsible for their entire structure in their home and they need what's called an HO3 policy, but they're maintaining an HO6 policy because they didn't know and their broker didn't understand the difference between a condo and a homeowners association. So each owner should be required to submit proof of coverage. Initially, that meets the requirement. So you can start and say, hey, we want everybody to submit this by February 1. Now all 100 owners submit it by February 1, and you verify, okay, well, they have insurance coverage, that's number 1, and they meet all the limits and the coverages that are required. And what needs to be done, and this is the step a lot of associations miss. So either the board tries to monitor it, or they put it on the property manager, which is just simply way too much work for them. They initially require it once to make sure everybody has it, and then that's kind of the end of it. They don't think about it anymore. Well, as I said before, if you have 100 different owners, they have 100 different effective dates. So I can show proof of coverage on February 1st, but if my policy is renewing on February 22nd, I may let it lapse because it didn't renew. My chose I wanted to save the money and think, oh, you know what, I'll bind the coverage again next year when February 1st comes around. So we've seen instances and that happens. So really, realistically, it needs to be monitored throughout the entire year. So each owner, if there's 100 different owners, there's probably 8 of them, an average of 8 every month that are renewing. Well, we need to verify that all 8 owners that month renewed and they show proof of coverage again. It needs to be done throughout the entire year. Find a company to do it for you. That would be my best advice. It's impossible for the board to do it. The property manager is not equipped to do so, nor do they have the time to handle this. I mean, the management contract is to manage the property, not to verify homeowners insurance. I know we provide this service. I'm sure other companies do. But if you're going to do it, you got to do it the right way, because what's going to happen at some point, and I've already been talking with some insurance company executives, is that they are going to eventually start requiring owners to have insurance, because what it does, it benefits the insurance companies as well. I mean, in certain scenarios, the owner's insurance will pick up improvements and things like that. Whereas if they didn't have insurance, well, then the insurance company has to pay at least something to get some of the unit back to its original condition. So it's better to be proactive and start handling this now and not wait for the insurance companies to require it.
Yeah, actually, Ed, on this slide, we have a QR code that could direct people if they scan it to our website, and it goes into a little bit more about the homeowner insurance monitoring service that we offer. But if anyone doesn't want to do that, could you just explain real quick, like what our service is and how we do that?
Yes. All right. So it's basically, it's said here, we have a platform. The board supplies us with a list of all the owners and their email addresses, and it's all handled by email, basically. So emails go out saying, we are working on behalf of whatever the association name is. You're required to maintain insurance or this type of insurance or all of these insurance. So it goes out, and all they do really is click a link and they upload the documents. And then what we do is we compare the insurance policy to what the requirements are in the governing documents. And we either say they complied or they didn't comply. And a report is submitted to the board at the end of the month saying, okay, well, out of those 100 units, 95 of them responded and complied, 5 didn't. And the board can do what they choose at that point. And then over the course of the next 12 months, so it's we continue to monitor the expirations of each one of them. Same thing. We have your insurance is expiring in 2 weeks or 30 days, whatever it is. Please show us proof. Same thing. And then we submit a report to the board every month saying, okay, well, these 8 owners, these 8 had all renewed their policies and they all comply. So it's something that it is time consuming, but it is a necessity. And so that's why I say find a company to do it for you.
Great, great. Thanks for that. And I mean, we're just about done here. I think the important thing to remember is that we really can't predict what's going to happen, but the way things are trending, 20% on the budget for an increase in insurance for a building with no claims and no problems is pretty much what we're seeing right around now. If you have a building with claims or there's problems or those violations in the 5 boroughs that I mentioned, you can expect an increase of even more than 20%, unfortunately. So, I mean, it's something that there are buildings that aren't getting hit quite with 20%. So for those, it's still nice to budget for it because that way you're happy that you have a little extra money set aside at the time. But I mean, it's been a huge sticker shock to a lot of people. And actually, we do have a couple questions that came in here while we were going. The first one here is from Thomas. It says, how we pay for large increases impacted by what we think the market is going to look like. Are increased premiums here to stay for at least the next 3 to 5 years? This outlook affects our choice. What's your professional view? And I mean, we can't really predict what's going to happen 3 to 5 years from now. Like I started out saying this, the market is cyclical. Sometimes we're in a soft market, sometimes we're in a hard market. For the foreseeable future, though, at least for 2024, it's looking like at least 20% increases is the way to go with your budgets. Another question we got from Lynn was.
That's why I jump in for a second, Eric. I tend to agree with you on that. I mean, we can't predict 3 to 5 years from now, but 2024 will certainly be an increase from everything we're hearing. I do think at some point, like I said, the insurance market is cyclical. It will come down. Starting to see companies now that are starting to dabble, put their toe in the water. And that's what usually drives down the insurance premiums. At some point, well, the hard market is triggered because insurance carriers aren't making money, so they raise their rates. Companies bail out and they tighten the guidelines. And so you're not eligible for as many quotes as you normally would be, which kind of is supply and demand. Well, what happens is the soft market is usually triggered when the insurance companies start to make money. And some of them are, some of them aren't. I mean, again, we're seeing a lot more. We've seen more billion-dollar disasters this year by the end of August than we've seen every year prior for the last 20 some odd years. So they make money that way. But what also happens is when they start, you get new companies who come in and they see dollar signs. What they start doing is they start putting out quotes that are lower, and that triggers other insurance companies to lower their premiums. So can't predict 2025. I do think the insurance rates in the market will start to level off at some point. Maybe it's 2025, maybe it's 2026. But 2024, like you said, budget a little bit of an increase, and then we'll revisit next year.
Great. And then Lynn commented on something we didn't really get into. Lynn said, I own rent stabilized buildings, and I have tenants who can only go by the rent guidelines. What can I do to reduce insurance costs? I've not had a claim in over the past 10 years. So for Lynn, what we suggest is go with the higher deductible. That's really the best thing for you to do is try to keep out any of those small claims that you can. I know you haven't had any claims over the past 10 years, but even increasing your deductible, like I said, it will lower the premium a little bit. Again, not as lucrative as it used to be, but there will be some relief there for you. The next one we got here is.
Eric, I just want to jump in here again, buddy.
Yeah. Go
One of
ahead.
the other things here is, I mean, we don't know the carrier you're with, and they may be the greatest one that for you at this point, but we don't know that. And so my thought process is you want to make the building as attractive as possible to other insurance companies. And so I don't know what kind of life safety they have, but you may want to add certain things, emergency lights. There may be certain things that are keeping you from being eligible to be with another insurance carrier. And maybe that would be the way to have your insurance premiums lower, is maybe the carrier down the street who has a better rate isn't interested in insuring the building because they may not have the life safety. So I would take a look at what you have there. Do we have electric like Federal Pacific stab lock, which are frowned upon by insurance companies? It's impossible to get quotes from carriers. If you have that, you may want to look into paying the cost to upgrade the electric, so that way that opens up more opportunities. So you need to think in that terms as well.
And then somebody asked here, in New York, can you change the documents to make the unit owner responsible for the building's deductible if they're at fault? I think you had actually recently spoken to an attorney in the industry that gave you some information on this one.
Correct. So first off, from all the information that the attorneys have mentioned, in a condo, you can't put the building's deductible back on the owner, that it is a common expense. Now, co-ops can, but this is something where you have to go and change the bylaws and put a resolution in, so it is possible. But the thing that you also want to take into consideration when you say the owner is responsible, there are instances where an owner is negligent and they are responsible for the damage they caused. So there are scenarios in which case people have fallen asleep in bed with a lit cigarette. They have had toilets that have overflowed because things were dumped down there. I've seen a situation where a bathtub in a high-rise building overflowed because the guy was running in the tub and he went to watch the football game, got distracted, just like I would have as well. And so the tub overflowed, and so those considered negligence. And in those cases, the negligent party should be responsible for the damage they caused. So you may not necessarily need to change any of the governing documents. There may be certain aspects in where they are responsible for the damage they caused.
Right. The next question we got in was, are there any changes in the policy that are occurring with that premium increase? Less coverage, perhaps? On the umbrella side, definitely. The premiums are going up and the coverage is going down. And then as far as the other policies, like your property, your liability, it really depends on your carrier. If they're adding in any exclusions or anything like that, that's something that would be disclosed to you upon renewal. They usually send out a conditional renewal notice or things like that. So your broker should be notifying you of any changes, or if they're moving coverage from one carrier to the next. They really should be giving you a proposal with side-for-side comparisons of coverage and premiums, so you can see what you have now versus what you'll be having in the upcoming term. The next one we got here was, if the community association can't afford an umbrella, is there any ramifications of not carrying one? It's only required to have an umbrella if you have a mortgage and that mortgage company is requiring it. If they're not requiring it, you don't have to have one, but you're taking on the chance of.
I don't mean to interrupt you, buddy, but there are some instances where it is in the governing documents. So when the offering statement is done, it's in there as well. So there could be certain instances where they are required. So please keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry about that. But yeah, so I mean, if there's a mortgage or your governing documents are requiring it, then you have to have it. Otherwise, you're taking the chance of there being a claim of over $1 million. And if there's a claim that's over $1 million, anything at that point would become an out-of-pocket expense for the association.
And think about it now, if I'm an owner there and I know that we are required to have an umbrella and we chose to forego it, and now I have to reach into my pocket to pay for these lawsuits. I mean, again, where's the money come from? So if we have an issue that goes past, that pierces what should have been an umbrella, and there's no money for it, well, it's going to go back to all the owners. So what's going to happen? Everybody's going to get assessed. Now I'm not going to be very happy knowing I'm reaching into my pocket for $5,000 when we could have had a policy for $3,000. So you're probably going to be looking at lawsuits from owners. So as Eric had said, you reach into your pocket, one, to pay for any judgments or defense costs. Now, two, you may be sued by your owners because you were supposed to maintain an umbrella and did not.
Okay, we only have a couple left here. Then we can wrap it up. Looks like two of them are actually the same question. They just wanted to know some recommendations for the coverages that unit owners should carry. We could certainly give that to you on a case-by-case basis. If you want to contact us, we can look into specific locations and the units themselves and kind of give you an idea of of what minimum limits you should maintain. Obviously, every unit and location is different, but there are definitely some certain coverages that you should maintain. You want to have coverage for your personal contents. You want to have coverage for your personal liability. You want improvements or alterations. Basically, like I said earlier, that original specifications. So if there were improvements made to the unit, it's going to be your responsibility to insure those, not the association. So you'll want coverage for that. You also want loss of use and loss assessment coverage. So those are some of the main coverages you're really going to want in your HO6 policies.
Great. And we can't tell you on an individual basis, we can tell you what kind of coverages you should need. But if we're going to suggest, we will suggest and tell you what kind of coverages everyone should have. What limits, though, we will tell you a suggested minimum. And I'll stress the word minimum because that would be the bare minimum that they should have. And they may need a lot more.
Perfect. And the last one here, I think, was just a continuation of a previous question. How it said, what about climate related issues, specifically flooding? I think they're asking if that's kind of being limited. Now with flooding, it's you do have the NFIP, the federal government stepped in to help with some of the flood policies, but now we're seeing a lot of private insurance carriers offering coverage as well when you're in a flood zone. So it's nice to look around to see what your options are. But definitely check with your broker or check with us and we can see what your options are for flood. If you're not in a flood zone, you can actually get that included in your property policy if the carrier does include that and offer that. Otherwise, you would need a separate policy.
And just two things to keep in mind, even if they are including it, you want to make sure, because what I'm starting to see, Eric, is one, they're starting to raise the deductibles on the flood. So where it used to be 5,000, 10,000, now 2550, and I heard one carrier was thinking about going to 75,000. That's number one. And number two, there are two carriers out there, and probably more who use an endorsement that says, well, yeah, you have flood coverage. But what it goes on to say, and you have to read the wording on it, is there excess of any insurance that you could get through NFIP, basically. So every building can get coverage of NFIP. So if it's a co-op, the flood coverage with the carrier is basically saying, well, we're excess of how much flood coverage you can get from NFIP, which is 500,000 basically. And if you're a condo, they're basically saying, well, we're excess of how much coverage you can get through NFIP. Well, a condo can get basically up to 100% of the replacement value. So you may actually not have really any flood coverage, even though you think you have flood coverage and it says flood. There needs to be a box check saying it's primary, because a lot of the times with those carriers, it's excess. So you may see that coming in on your insurance policy. So as Eric had already said, anytime insurance carrier is going to change a policy or make changes, they got to issue a conditional notice that goes out 60 days in advance. And so this is when you have dialogue with your broker, okay, and make sure that you have the adequate coverage and nothing is really changing. All right, everyone, thank you. Here is Eric and my contact information, also our QR code. For those who had asked about the homeowner's insurance and suggested minimum limits and suggested coverages, please reach out. You have our email addresses here. You could also scan the QR code and we will get you a list of all the coverages that should be maintained and suggested minimum limits depending on what area you're in, how old the building is, etc. So, Eric, thank you very much. Great job as always. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.